Okay, let's talk some Shakespeare. You might love him, hate him, or probably don't care because he's been dead for 400 years. Anyway, so Shakespeare's actually a pretty big guy in the world of English literature, so much so that he's actually the most quoted author ever, after the authors of the Bible. And with good merit. A lot of his works are still being pulled apart by scholars today, as many are thought to have double meanings, hidden themes, and various other mysteries that have remained intriguing years later. And in the era pioneering the never-ending discussion of his work, we're going to explore a theme that's been picked up throughout a few of his plays, which is having the seemingly dumbest character either say or do the most significant lines or roles in the entire play. Let's start with Macbeth. So the play itself is actually rather tragic, as it focuses on one man's rise and fall from power due to the entangling snares of ambition. Though Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, and various other more serious and official characters all have significant and interesting lines on their own, there is one character who says something that possibly reveals one of the most significant themes of the play. The Porter. Now, the Porter was a character who was kind of a joke, and in many plays, stage directors actually cut out his scene altogether, which is kind of a bummer, because on the drunken night in which Macbeth murders King Duncan, there's a loud knocking on the castle door, and the porter, who had had a little too much of the happy juice at this point I might add, drunkenly slurs,
"Oh, here's a knocking indeed. If a man were porter of Hellgate, he should have hold turning the key. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there? I the name of Beelzebub."
And this is a big deal for a couple of reasons, but the most important one being the contrast the porter introduces between heaven and hell. But most importantly, the porter titles himself as the gatekeeper of hell. Now, of all the things Shakespeare could have done in this play, why did he deliberately insert a scene right after the murders of a drunken porter claiming to be the gatekeeper of hell? That's where things get interesting. A porter, the most ridiculous and seemingly nonsensical character in the entire play, gives us insight into something that hadn't occurred to many until now. That this was possibly Shakespeare's subtle way of hinting that Macbeth and his rise to power was actually the opposite of good and holy, and instead represented a ramification of hell. And if you really stop and think about it, you can see how this was a subtle but super foreshadowing hint as to what Macbeth's fate would become. Now, I know what some of you might be saying. Like, okay, that's cool and all, but how do you know it's not just a coincidence? Well, shush, I'm not done. On to Much Ado About Nothing. So, unlike Macbeth, the play Much Ado About Nothing airs on the more comical side of things. Pretty much all the characters are more lighthearted or amusing in some way. Except for Don John, also known as angsty Keanu Reeves, who is basically responsible for everything that went wrong in the first place. But of course, there's always that one character who seems dumber and like the ultimate joke compared to the rest. And in this story, it's Dogberry. Now, Shakespeare actually does something kind of cool in his plays, where he often creates a contrast between the more serious, intelligent, and important characters and the typically dumb, funny, and generally unintelligent ones, by the way in which they speak. For the smarter, more important, and/or more serious characters, he has them speak in what is called verse, more specifically in what's called iambic pentameter, which is the rhythm Shakespeare used most often in his writing. And as for the dumber characters, he does the opposite, as most of them speak in what is called prose, which is also just known as regular speech. And for our boy Dogberry, he spoke in prose, labeling him as a dumb character. Oh yeah, I also forgot to say that the porter also spoke in prose. I just forgot to mention it earlier. But wait, there's more. Because like the porter, Dogberry plays a super important, if not the most important role of the play. Because he was the one who ultimately discovered that the whole fiasco regarding Hero cheating on Claudio was in fact false and never happened and was a trick set up by angsty Keanu Reeves, and it turns out it was just one of Keanu's henchmen who was actually hooking up with one of Hero's servants. In a wig. So boom, enough said, I guess. Okay, so next is the Tempest. So there's this character named Caliban, who's basically a slave to Prospero, who's this guy that took over the island once he and his daughter washed up on shore. But we know that Caliban is the son of a native witch called Sycorax from the island, making him one of the only true natives. Now this is important because Prospero, Miranda, the shipwreck crew, and all other people who came to the island later weren't actually native to the land. However, this doesn't stop them from calling Caliban various names such as monster, slave, hagseed, demidevil, strange fish, savage, and other lovely things, along with the whole enslaving him thing. And Prospero essentially justifies these actions in doing so by recounting Caliban's lack of knowledge of things such as language and being uncivilized in nature. I mean, okay, technically, the reading also suggests that Caliban may have tried to rape Miranda too, but that's a whole other complicated tangent that we don't have time to get into. Anyway, at one point, there's a scene where Caliban is chilling with these two other dudes named Trinculo and Stefano, and they're plotting to kill Prospero. But after hearing sounds produced by Ariel, who is a spirit that basically is forced to go around doing all Prospero's dirty work, Not understanding what the noise was, nor where it was coming from, Stefano and Trinculo begin to freak out a little bit, but Caliban comforts them by saying,
"Be not afeared, the isle is full of noises, sound and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that, if I had waked after long sleep, will make me sleep again. And then, in dreaming, the clouds methought would open, and some riches ready to drop upon me, that when I waked, I cried to dream again."
Now this is important for two reasons. One, Caliban normally says brash and what is considered more unintelligent things, and here he says something not only deep and meaningful, but downright poetic. And two, this means that for some reason, Shakespeare was trying to make something about Caliban's speech stand out from everything else. And this is where I have to go into a little bit of history. So at the time that The Tempest was being written, the British Empire was all about that invade foreign lands and colonize them thing. And so a lot of Shakespeare's audience would have been very invested in the topic of colonialization. Now, a lot of scholars and other people believe that Shakespeare wrote Caliban to represent the natives of the lands that Great Britain was colonizing, and that Prospero represented the colonizer. In this way, a difficult question is brought to light about the morality of the whole situation. Is it right to take over and colonize the land because the native inhabitants are so-called uncivilized? And who is to say that teaching them our language and our culture makes them so? This would have posed an uncomfortable and quite possibly controversial question for the audience, which no doubt at least began a thought process that made the audience possibly question the actions and mentality of their own society. Either way, it's a really important topic that was, yet again, posed by a seemingly unintelligible/unimportant character. And finally, we have A Midsummer Night's Dream. So out of all the other plays we've talked about so far, this one is definitely the most ridiculous one. With fairies, kings, queens, and lovesick teens all running around because of a simple prank gone awry, many wouldn't look too deeply into this play anyway. But that's where you're wrong, because even in a play that seems to be entirely a joke, there are a couple particularly dumb or ridiculous characters that, yet again, say or do a significant thing in the play. Let's take Helena, for instance. Now, if you guys don't remember Helena, she was basically the person that nobody liked, nor anyone cared about. Kind of like Nickelback or the word moist. But anyway, Helena was into Demetrius, but Demetrius had the hots for this girl named Hermia, and Hermia was into this guy named Lysander, and Lysander liked Hermia back, so they were a thing, which left Helena sad and forever alone. But yeah, so she basically goes into this rant about how life isn't fair, and she's just as beautiful as Hermia, yada yada yada, until she eventually says this.
"Things base and vile, holding no quantity. Love can transpose to form and dignity. Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid painted blind."
Now, you can just think of this all as Helena being salty that she's the great value version of Hermia, but I think there's a lot more significance to it than that. She brings to light how love is blind for every person, no matter who you are, and therefore there's an inherent bias, which is one of the most profound and insightful lines of the entire play, I think. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the secret significance of the seemingly most insignificant characters. Thanks for watching.